Cops of Reddit, what is the most corrupt thing you've seen done by a co-worker on the job? Not cop but security. Found out after he was arrested that a co-worker was stealing state laptops. Because it had state confidential information, the NSA also went after him. Dumbus 19-year-old somehow found a good enough lawyer to put him on house arrest with his parents. Wish I'd kept his number just to find out who the lawyer was. So this isn't really an egregious abuse of power, but it's something I will always remember. I used to work a late night shift where I'd be driving home every night at about 1 AM. There is this one stretch of road that was always frustrating to me because you have to go through 6 traffic lights, and if you get hit by a red on one of them, you'll get hit with a red on all of them despite there being no other cars on the road. Well, one night on the way home, I got stopped by the first red light and cursed my luck. I cursed my luck again when shortly after a cop pulled up next to me. It wasn't uncommon for cops to pull me over this late at night, probably for random DUI checks or something, and it was just us on the road that night. So we get through light number 1 and get stopped again at light number 2. I looked over at the cop and he rolled his eyes at me, which made me laugh, and I shrugged my shoulders to imply, well, what can ya do? Just gotta wait. And then the greatest thing happened. As we are rolling towards traffic light number 3, the cop flashed his lights for a second to cause the red to change to a green. He then proceeded to flash his lights at the next 3 traffic lights to trigger the green, so we didn't have to stop the rest of the way through. All these guys were fired, so that's good. 2 were direct co-workers. The others were neighboring departments. Took custody of stray cat. Instead of properly handling it, he took it to a field and shot it, then lied about why. Took custody of stray cat. Instead of handling it properly, just released it, and then lied about it. Used his position of authority to get sick stuff from a subordinate civilian employee and other casual sexual harassment. Wrote out tickets to parked cars and then paid the tickets himself. Because he became mental and needed to look like he was doing something without being confrontational with other people anymore. Got addicted to opiates and started stealing from evidence room. Got addicted to opiates and started stealing from evidence room. Nobody does any illegal it around me because I announce early and often that I'll roll on them if they duck up. I provide examples as well. I'm not getting hemmed up over someone else's bullet. Read a memoir by a rookie detective who was tasked with investigating a possible serial killer. As the case dragged on for years with zero progress, she eventually got the extra manpower she had been arguing for. But the new cops on the case fixated on the wrong suspect and intentionally withheld evidence from the lead investigator in the hope of taking credit for their collar. In the meantime, dozens of prostitutes were brutally murdered. One of their aunties, working alone with no resources at all, managed to identify the killer and locate the scene of the crimes, but was ignored by police, who failed to arrest the man for a couple more years. During the investigation, a victim managed to escape with multiple stab wounds, ending up being treated at the same hospital as the killer. She had stabbed him back, and the police let him go free without charges. A friend of the killer reported him to police, and they still made no arrests. Anyway, the writer ended up with PTSD, and I almost got it myself from reading her book. Guy I used to work with kept searching people on justifiable grounds, but they were on the thin side. For 3 searches running, the guys claimed that he stole either their money or drugs. Apparently he had a spotty history with similar allegations. Nobody ever actually came forward to make the complaint. I reported it, but if the victim doesn't report it, then there is nothing they can do. I am assuming they contacted the victims since we had their details on file, but I'm not entitled to details of the investigation. Thankfully that ducker is long gone for some other bullet. His wife is a detective and mysteriously some drugs went missing twice, which she blamed on me. However, investigation showed that I was not the last person to have touched them, and it seemed like she was trying to get back at me. She got investigated for those missing drugs. They amazingly turned up again, fallen behind a shelf in the property store which she found. I'm not a cop, but this is the best misuse of police power I have personally witnessed. Years ago, during a particularly cold and snowy winter, I was coming home late one night early morning. The streets were pretty clear, as it had snowed right after an ice storm. and the roads were coated with a combination of black ice and compacted snow. As I am slowly driving down the road, I see someone in the distance spinning out and doing donuts in the middle of a 4-lane avenue. Not out of control, just slowing, doing spin-outs in the middle of the street. As I get closer, I notice it's a local city cop car. Just when I notice it's him, he must have noticed I was coming towards him because he recovered from his spin and pulled off into the closest side street. I pass where he pulled in and continued on my way. After I get about a quarter mile away, I see him in my rearview mirror pull back out onto the street and start doing his spin-outs again. I laughed all the way home. Son of a police officer in Germany here. Tons of small it. Stealing from each other. Deliberately drawing a produce out to make the other person late, etc. But the worst, superiors strategically bullying others if they dislike them or are jealous. The absolute worst is probably when they are in training and get their guns. A surprising amount of officers in training end up committing suicide. UK dude here. Not me but my father. When we were younger we had planned to go to a big indoor water park. Wet n Wild. I don't remember what the occasion was but something like a birthday. Anywho, on said day his car broke, so instead of letting us down he got a friend to take him to work and he borrowed an undercover police car for the day. Needless to say they found out and I believe he got demoted for it. I was young though. I've seen my co-workers be complete and utter pieces of it, but nothing actually corrupt comes to mind. Not a cop, but the most corrupt thing I've personally seen cops do was back in 2001, before camera phones, in San Francisco. Me and my friends were DJing this after party and the SFPD showed up to bust it. The two hostesses went out to try and talk them out of the raid. I watched from a second story window as they chatted, and then the two male cops pulled out a roll of circular SFPD stickers. They proceeded to paste the stickers on the breasts of the hostesses and grope the it out of their tits. Then they left laughing and the two girls came in all freaked out. We called the SFPD complaint line but absolutely nothing happened. My friend even got a letter to the editor about the incident published in the now defunct Bay Guardian newspaper and absolutely nothing happened. Turn away a victim of domestic violence for a bullet excuse, then later on message them over social media to ask for a date. Father was a cop. One of my favorites is that the first sheriff he was under started his day with a case of beer in his office. The 7 AM patrol shift would show up early and help him with the beer before going out on the road. The 70s were a different time. Another good one is when a female LT grabbed the male Sarge by the balls and threatened to squeeze them if he didn't get on board with some questionable policy she was implicating. Wrong word. Correct one close but is escaping me. Not a cop, but worked for the courts at the time. The chief of police was fired and there were allegations he sexually assaulted a woman he arrested and he was also extorting money. There's a pending FBI investigation about stealing drugs while working on a narc team. I need to look it up and see what happened with that. Definitely not a cop, but this is the infamous Windows 95 scam a lot of Melbourne cops were in on back in 1994-5. Shop windows get smashed every now and again in cities at night and they need to be repaired immediately. This is lucrative work for glaziers, and some started paying spotters fees to the person that reported the damage. This came out of the exorbitant fees they'd charge. Cops started smashing windows in stores themselves to claim the finder's fee. It got big and started costing stores and their insurers a load. Late husband once told me 2 stories as a state trooper in the 70s. Although number one is not corrupt. He worked in a state that was rural and vast, a long way from point A to B. So after a long shift he was on his way back to the station. He sees a drunk driver in front of him. He realizes if he pulled this guy over, he would have to test him, arrest him, wait for a tow, and book him into the station. All this would add another 4 hours onto a long shift. He pulls the guy over, drunk, cuffs the guy to one of his own tires. He puts the cuff keys at a reachable distance and goes home. Hubby figured when the DUI was sober enough, he could undo the cuffs and go on his merry way. 2. The department was getting multiple domestic abuse calls from neighbors. This husband was repeatedly beating on his wife. Remember, there were no firm laws regarding domestic abuse. He and his fellow officers got tired of repeated calls. and frustrated when wife refused to press charges. So the next time there was a call, they again arrested him. This time the written arrest report had a comment how the husband resisted arrest and fell from the bottom of the stairs while going up to the cells, sustaining some broken ribs, bruising and stitches. Arresting officers also had some words with the guy. He never again beat his wife. Repeated theft of tens of thousands from the Boeing company. An entire crew of mechanics corroborating with a manager to receive little to no work, as well as leaving work and in some cases not even showing up while still being paid. People who use novelty accounts. Like, why? Do you think everything is a joke? It gets pretty irritating and most of them are just trolls. That's why I don't trust them. Not a cop. There is a local dog owner that had 2 big Great Danes. Basically farm dogs. Not dangerous to anyone. They got lost because they got out of the farmyard. Since the gate was open, owner searched for them, but the cops found them first and was apparently scared of these 2 huge dogs. The radio record goes something like this. Bravo 20 Police HQ. Yes. 05. Hey 05. What's up? Ground. We are here and dogs are tired. And he who have more knowledge of dogs than me. Which at least know in front and rear of those believe that judgment is no danger to run away. So tired as they are now. So we keep an eye on them in anticipation of that we may obtain a owner who can get control on them. HQ. Damn, you are beginning to get soft PC. Yes. You think that it should have been bangs here? HQ. Yes. And you folks will be called the tampon patrol from now on. And then they discuss the pain doing the paperwork, etc. They shot those dogs, even that there were no danger to anyone, and tried to cover it up. Fired at the dogs 18 times. In night time in the middle of a cabin district, with MP5s. A very bad idea. Absolute unsafe as it is in a very flat area, and that with full metal jacket bullets. Only 6 of these bullets are accounted for. The owner is suing the police. He has all records of the audio despite attempts at getting those banned from the court. Guess who tried to do that? They actually called the owner after they had shot those dogs, but could clearly have called a lot earlier. The court session will be held in another county, so the local police department cannot meddle. It's going to be an interesting day. Oh, I love these types of questions, as usually cops will never admit to anything unless you are in their little circle. I'm not a cop, but I work with cops often, and I've seen cops steal petty stuff, officially lie to me, other people, and in their reports break laws and admit to me ridiculously ducked up it they've done to people without any remorse, usually bragging in a sadistically jokey manner. Oh come on Sessions, you're not even trying now. Not a cop, but I am like 75% sure a detective recently killed in Baltimore was killed to prevent him from testifying against another cop. Dude was shot with his own gun, had a different partner than normal that day, and was set to testify in a grand jury against a dirty cop in a few days. There has been a $215K reward out for information that leads to the case being solved, and the BPD had a huge chunk of the city on basically lockdown for several days, and it hasn't yet smoked out a suspect. No ducking way was this some random act of violence. After we were attacked physically by someone in a single residency hotel, my partner at the time gave him one last punch in the gut after we physically controlled him with handcuffs. I didn't report it. I used to work for a company that had a contract to do work with the city we live in. The company owner used to be on the city council, but recused himself once he got the city contract. The city had a bond issue for schools funded by sales tax. After the bond expired past the time that it was approved, they kept the sales tax going and gave the money, $7 million, to my boss in the form of a no-interest loan. Last year the FBI raided the mayor's office and everybody got indicted because they had been doing stuff like that all over town. The city is Beaumont, California, as anybody wants to look into it further. Might want a serious tag on this one. Nice try. Internal Affairs. Was a security liaison for a railroad that had its own police department. Basically I did all the work and patrolling, but when anything happened I would have to radio the officers to make an arrest. One night I witnessed the severe beating of a homeless man who was caught riding on one of the trains. The man did nothing to warrant said beating. The officer broke his face is the only way I can put it. After the beating, the officer looks at me and says, "You saw him spit on me and go for my gun." After taking him to the local jail, the officer offered to take me to McDonald's and over our meals tell me if I ever needed a recommendation he would be more than willing to give me one. One of our cops was just arrested and charged with solicitation of sodomy to a minor who was involved in a case he was on. Dude was also a ducking teacher at the high school. A guy pulls into a spot at a Hurricanes game. Cop flashes his lights and the guy moves. Cop pulls into the spot. Not a cop, but I know many, including this one. TLDR. Sheriff's son gets caught trafficking sugar. Doesn't even really do any jail time. Sentenced 5 years. But gets to do 3 years house arrest and the rest probation. Any regular citizen would probably get 10-20 years in prison. Not a cop, but have an extreme example. Cops threatening to kill my entire family who have nothing at all to do with any criminal scenes. A family member discreetly reported some drug trafficking that they witnessed by chance to a family friend who is a cop. Next thing we know, death threats start arriving. Friend cop who I had never had anything to do with then starts showing up at my school to give talks to kids. Every time he ends up showing off his guns, making sure that I get a look down the barrel. Gun safety, anybody? He then joined my parents' church and sat behind them every Sunday, forcing my parents to pretend that nothing is wrong and playing all buddy-buddy in public. He was evil. Before he suddenly started turning up all the time, we had given him the benefit of the doubt that he had just trusted the wrong person with the info. By sheer unrelated chance, I later came into possession of evidence of a different trafficking operation. Simply some guy who thought he was alone bragging loudly on the phone, but giving very specific details. I just ignored it. Glad I did, as years later most of the suburbs cops were under investigation. One last incident. I had a cop kick my inner knee to try and make my spread my legs for a search. Could have just asked. My knee dislocated. That happens a lot. But they did not know that, and I fell down an embankment, landing with my leg facing an unnatural way and screaming. Both cops just threatened the group I was with, then walked away quickly, leaving me crippled and miles from a hospital. A good thing too, I guess. As it turns out, my mates did indeed have a bunch of naughty stuff that would have been found. I once witnessed a cop shoot at a deer inside the city limits. The deer didn't seem to be injured, and where we live they are quite tame and easily approachable. It was just standing there looking around, and the cop lifted his gun and shot twice at it. It dropped to the ground. He clearly had fatally shot the animal. Never quite understood the reasoning behind it, but it was late and I guess he thought no one was around to watch him as he tried dragging the deer core to the back of his police truck. I briefly worked in a health-related field when in Vietnam. I didn't see this personally but heard of it the day after. A man arrives injured at a public hospital after a moderate scooter accident. He has spinal swelling, which can be easily treated with a steroid injection. He has no cash, so the hospital staff refuse to treat him. Prioritization of care by money wealth is the unofficial rule. When his family finally arrives with money, it is too late and he is permanently paralyzed. Cost of care: medicine demanded $5. About 25 years ago, my mom worked for a lawyer next to the police station in our once little town in Texas. She was friends with the dispatch lady and they often went to lunch together. My mom asked why the ambulance was there at least 2 or 3 times a week. No joke. The dispatch lady said the prisoners keep falling in their cell and hitting their head. Our family was friends with one of those city cops. We never found out who was hurting the prisoners, if he partook in that or not. Not a cop, but late one night I was going through a green light and the other side had a red light and there was a cop sitting there waiting. I guess it was too long for him cause he flashed his lights for a second to get through it, lol. Obligatory: I'm not a cop. Saw a cop turn on the sirens, drive through 2 intersections, pull a U-turn at a light, turn off the sirens and go to the McDonald's drive-through. Bumping into co-workers at clan meetings. Semi-on topic. I've never understood why criminals don't grasp the concept of staying quiet during questioning. I mean, really, just don't say a single word and you're so much less likely to be charged with anything unless there's hard evidence. Let's just say we have a state trooper who is family of our extended family. Imagine every self-centered, egotistical stattery you could meet and then double that. And that was this guy. Someone stole his daughter's iPad and he used the Find Me app to track it down, and then all his resources as an officer to make this poor sap pay for it in some of the most underhanded and despicable ways. Even though the guy admitted it when confronted and he got iPad back. The trooper and his buddies made this guy's life hell for a few weeks. Was pulled over 6 times in 2 days. Last one for suspicion of DUI. Had his car towed twice. Was given a parking and handicap spot ticket. I heard that the poor sap was a young 20-something years old and was so traumatized he didn't leave his house for a few months. In my city, cops who tell on other cops get murdered. Google the murder of Detective Sean Suter. He was set to testify on these corrupt cops, and the day before he was shot with his own gun in an alley. An old manager stole roughly $50,000 from the company over an 8-year span. It was interesting, because she was so by the books. I guess you have to be when you're doing all the stealing. To clarify, she stole the money through various channels. Our points program, taking merchandise, marking down items for family members to pennies, gift cards, and layaway scams. Not a cop but my buddy who has said that the blue code absolutely exists, and that itty cops will tell you it doesn't and good cops will tell you it does. None of the other people I know who are cops admit to the blue code, and I know a lot of cops, and similarly enough they're all itty people, at least outside of work. Not a cop, but this piece of it. TLDR, corrupt cop busted for theft of drugs. Going to go to prison. Instead kills himself in traffic accident. Wife more than likely claims insurance. My father's story from the time when this country still had the protection of the sickle and hammer dangling above its head. He and his friend were at a sea city for a trip. Bought some ice cream and were just eating them at some steps, outside, on a house block on some main street. Then comes over the police, looks at them and asks them what are they doing. After a simple explanation the dude busts them in for nothing, and I don't remember if it was a couple of hours of full day, slams them into the cell. But that wasn't the worst part. My father saw on the police station as a, and I quote, some over the top snarky fatitch was slapping around a kid that wasn't even 18 years old. And it wasn't the little slap on the cheek. They were full itch slap from left and right. 911 dispatcher here. I had to rat out an officer for asking me to lie. Relatively minor, but still pissed me off. He was responding to a residential silent panic alarm while he was still en route. He asked me to call the alarm company to get a responder. I called the alarm company and they asked if officer was on scene. His status still showed en route, so I asked just in case we didn't update it. He wasn't there. Alarm company said they won't call anyone until officer goes on scene. Makes sense. I tell the officer and he replies back, well, tell them I'm on scene then. He's notoriously a D. So I didn't reply back and simply told my supervisor. She pulled a copy of the transmissions and went to his sergeant. That's acceptable. Most times the cops around here do that to get through crowded intersections. Makes traffic worse than it already is. I've seen a cop turn on his sirens just so people would make room for him to merge, then immediately turn them back off. Entitled ass. An old friend of mine who is a sheriff's deputy in another state would send official looking demands to various social media and online message board sites to harass, unmask, or otherwise duck with people who had talked bad about him online. I'm waiting to see a story about a cop extorting people for donuts. Nice try, internal investigator. When I think of police corruption, I always remember this episode of This American Life. Full stop. No cop will actually answer this question. The blue wall of silence is a big thing. They are a gang. Not corrupt, but I once saw a police charger stop in front of me, drift into the other lane, and speed off. Down in Miami Gardens to be specific, the police chief was arrested in a prostitution sting, trying to solicit a prostitute, and was fired before he got out of jail the next morning. Not an abuse of power type thing, but somebody in my year at school dove off a bridge into a local river. This is something people often do during the summer here, and the bridge isn't a huge height off the water. Problem was, he overestimated how good his swimming abilities were. He couldn't swim. 2 policemen had stopped earlier to supervise what was going on, make sure nobody was being an idiot. When the guy jumped in, we all ran to them for help. The younger policeman told us that it was against health and safety law for them to jump in and save him, and they needed the proper water training. All the while, his older partner was ripping off his radio and stab vest to jump in and save him. Everyone got out of that alive and well thanks to that guy. I hope he didn't get into trouble for it. Family member was a cop. Early in her career, early 80s, she was in a department in a notoriously bad city. At her retirement party, some of her co-workers got up and told stories. The worst one was a bunch of cops responding to someone who called the suicide hotline in the middle of the night. Found him getting ready to hang himself. Told him he better not do it until after 2 AM. When the new shift came in, he did just what they asked. Waited until 3 AM before hanging himself. Acquaintance with a Leo. I watched him run out of a house party and assault a guy walking down the street and search him since he was a known drug dealer. Right before that he had just crushed some stolen Vicodin to snort. Same officer told me about planting fingerprints on a stolen vehicle. The suspect ran and successfully evaded but was caught later on. They needed to tie him to the crime since they knew it was him. Same officer was told by the sheriff that all officers could charge an extra 100 hours of OT to the budget as we just had a double homicide in our small town and they were all ramped up for the investigation. He told them to just make sure you can give an excuse for the time. Different officer sells Molly on the side. Offered to hook me up while at a party with 10 or so other officers present. Yo, I declined.